Hey mama, welcome back to the One Income Family podcast. Sticking to your budget is really hard work, but there are things that you can do to make it easier on yourself, and one of those things is setting boundaries. Yes, I know this is a scary word that brings out all of the feelings, but it's necessary. So in today's episode, I am going to share with you 5 signs that tell you that you need to set some boundaries. Then I'm going to share with you the steps that you can take so that you can create some boundaries that will help you thrive on one income. So go grab that stroller, pop in your headphones, and let's get to it. Do you find it hard to save or get out of debt? Are you constantly searching for ways to save money and live on a budget? Do you have big dreams only to be stopped by not sticking to your budget? Are you ready for financial freedom? Then you, mama, are in the right place. Welcome to the One Income Family podcast, where you will learn what it looks like to budget on one income, how to partner with God in your finances, how to budget in a way that's easy to stick to, and how to cut costs and save money, all so that you can start building wealth. It is my mission to equip you with these tools so that you can live in abundance regardless of the amount in your account. Hey, I'm Molly, a budget coach for stay-at-home moms, and I know what it's like to struggle on one income. I've lived paycheck to paycheck, relied on being frugal, and failed many budgets until I learned how to budget without tracking. This has allowed my family to pay off debt and build wealth all on one income. So, if you are ready for financial freedom, then go grab that stroller, plug in those headphones, and let's get to it. I see you, mama. You're out there, you're living on a set income, and there's no wiggle room, and it's exhausting. I know that you're struggling to balance it all. I know that you want to stop living paycheck to paycheck so that you can save money, pay off debt, but most importantly, you just want to live your life and enjoy it and have fun. I see you struggling to get ahead because budgeting, tracking, and managing it all just feels impossible. It's time to let that all go, to stop feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, and to lean into an easier way of budgeting. I am going to help you set up a budget that ends the paycheck to paycheck cycle, a budget that gives you wiggle room so that you can buy the extra things, a budget that is set up on systems so that management is simple and tracking is easy. I want you to hit pause right now and go to calendly.com/Molly Bunnell so that you can get started with me and we can get this going for you. Again, that's calendly.com/Molly Bunnell, calendly.com/Molly with a Y, B as in boy, ENELL. UN? Boundaries. Oh boy, boundaries are definitely a touchy subject in a lot of places, right? Because boundaries means that you have to stay accountable. You have to stay on top of whatever it is that you're trying to set a boundary around, right? You have to say no to things sometimes. And boundaries are just this thing that sometimes feels like it's restricting, right? But they're not. Boundaries are healthy. They are good for us. We see it all throughout the Bible that the boundaries that God wants us to have, to be humble, to love one another, to say yes or no and be direct, to be honest to each other, to set priorities. These are all boundaries that the Lord tells us to create in our lives. But when we sit down and we actually think about it, our boundaries are loose. Our boundaries are non-existent sometimes. They aren't actually something that we truly actually act on, right? We sit there and we come up with these ideas of rules and things that could possibly help us to stick to whatever it is that we're trying to do, like the budget. But we become so wishy-washy and undisciplined, and we just fall to the wayward side, right? We don't continue to do what we need to do. We don't stick with the boundaries so that we can actually succeed in whatever it is that we are trying to do. And that is what can be a touchy subject. And the fact that we have to say no, again, that is something that is hard to do, and it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of priority setting, essentially. And so that is why I wanted to do today's episode. I wanted to open your eyes to some of the things that are going on in your budget and in your life that are saying, hey, your boundary is not strong here, or it's non-existent, and you need to set something so that you can become stronger in your budgeting, so that you can stick to your budget and you can learn the steps that you need to take in order to continue to move forward instead of staying stuck and stagnant where you're at, right? We want to move forward. I want you to be able to achieve those financial goals. I want you to be able to have the wiggle room to buy the extra things that you want. But if you are wishy-washy and undisciplined about your boundaries, or even don't have boundaries set, then you aren't going to be able to do those extra things that you want to do. You're not going to be able to save for whatever it is that you want to save for. It's going to end up you just living in a paycheck to paycheck lifestyle, and that's not what I want for you. So, with that being said, let's dive into the first sign, which this is a big one, and I know that you probably know this already, but it's something that needs to be talked about, because if this isn't happening, your life, your joy is not there. Like, you're stressed and you're overwhelmed. And that sign is that your needs aren't being met. You're having to choose between which bill to pay. You have to choose between groceries or gas, and that is stressful. That is something that nobody wants to or should have to worry about. And that is a sign that you need to create either a bills account or a bills system so that you know that those bills are being met. And then maybe a system like my number one rule, where you make sure that your needs are met first, right? That's something that you can do to make sure that that isn't being just pushed to the side, right? That's not something you should have to stress about or worry about. And I know that you have the funds for it. I know that you're smart enough. I know you have the ability to do this. It's just being disciplined enough to sit down and set these boundaries so that it is taken care of, right? So that is the first sign. The second sign that I want to talk about is that you find yourself constantly overspending. And this is something that can show up in many different ways. It could be in your gas, it could be in your groceries, it could be in your bills, right? It could be things like Netflix or coffees or, all this stuff. And I know I constantly go to these things, but I want you to know that that's not the only thing. Like, that's the thing that the world talks about the most. But sometimes it could be just maybe you like to buy gifts for people, and that's where you find yourself overspending. Or maybe you like to get a soda here and there, and that's where your money goes. There are so many different habits that are an overspending nature. My husband likes to buy food. He also likes to buy parts, random parts that we don't need, that they just end up sitting on the shelf, right? That's an overspending habit because of some reason, like maybe it's a mental thing. Maybe he wants to make sure he has a backup. Maybe it's just that it makes you feel good. Maybe, there are so many reasons as to why we could constantly be overspending. But wondering what that is and figuring out what that is the first step, and then creating a system behind that so that maybe you can get that. I'm not saying cut it out completely, but maybe you start by slowly cutting back on the amount that you have. So maybe you get whatever the item is. We're just, for the kicks and giggles, going to say coffee, right? Because for some reason, I just really want a coffee right now. So we're going to say that every single time you go out, you get a coffee. Well, maybe one time when you go out, say you go out, I don't know, once a week, and you get a coffee every single time. So maybe we say we cut one back and we only get 3 coffees that month instead of 4 coffees, right? So it can be something like that you can just slowly put a boundary around. You can slowly start cutting yourself back so that it's not overwhelming, so that it's not like quitting cold turkey, because quitting cold turkey, that was a tongue twister, is not something that people are able to stick to very well. That's why you want to create a boundary. You want to create a system that allows you to slowly start cutting back so that it's not so overwhelming and it's more doable, right? That allows you to slowly put that money back in and then keep you from maybe overspending in another category, right? Because there are so many areas that you can find yourself overspending. But if you slowly do it and then you put that money into some place where you actually want it to go, it makes leaps and bounds of difference in your budget. Okay, so then the third thing that I want to talk about is something that can be seen both with your kids and your husband. Can you guess what that is? Fighting about money. This is something that tells me, if you're fighting about your money, that you don't have boundaries set up. This tells me that you two have never sat down, or even with your kids, sat down and said, okay, this is what I have. This is what we can do. That was kind of like more focused towards kids. So for instance, boundaries with your kids. You're going to the store, right? So you tell them out in the car, we are not buying anything extra. We are not getting toys. We are not getting this. That sets the expectation, that sets the boundary so that they know when we go in the store, we're not going to whine and complain about these things that we want. Now, they're kids and it's not going to be perfect. But the more you do it, the more you set that stone in place and then you stick to it. That is the key right there. You can't tell them in the car that we're not going to buy anything, and then you go in the store and you buy them what they're wanting because they're kicking and screaming and throwing a fit. Then they're going to know that that boundary is wishy-washy, it's not true, and they can still get their way by just being a silly little kid throwing a tantrum, right? You have to stick to that boundary. You have to be solid and you have to follow through, even if it's embarrassing, even if it's something that you don't want to do. But as soon as they understand that that boundary is there, they will start following it and it will become easier. Now with your husband, fighting about money there is simply communicating. It's working together to figure out who's gonna give here and there. And that's a bad way of putting it, but there is compromise in relationships. And it's a matter of who at that moment is going to compromise and whose needs and whose wants are higher priority at the time. I'm not going to say more important because it's not more important, but there can be like deadlines on things, and there can be issues with needing to have it right now, right? Because say he needs shoes for work, right? You can't just say, oh, well, we'll get that next week. No, you got to get the shoes, which means if you wanted to get some makeup or something like that, it's going to have to wait till the next week, right? That's compromise. That's being able to handle it and figure out which situation is of higher priority so that you can take it on, right? And if you sit down and you talk to each other and you have a conversation about boundaries, about when we need to sit down and talk to each other about maybe a limit. Say you're okay with buying something as long as it's under $50, right? But then at the same time, you have to know that that money is still in the budget, right? There has to be boundaries. There has to be limits so that you know if you can spend something and if you should talk together and what you should talk on and how you make these decisions. Like, communication is key, and that fighting is going to go away as soon as you put these boundaries in place and you sit down and you start talking. You have to create the boundaries. You know what your needs are. Your husband knows what his needs are. And you have to come together to set these boundaries, to set these expectations. That's another way of putting it. Maybe a better way of putting, instead of saying boundaries, putting expectations there. If you have the expectations set down in stone, and you stick to them and you do it the same every single time, it's going to be so much easier to make financial decisions. Now, it's not going to be easy at the beginning. You have to work towards these things. You have to be diligent. You have to be strong-minded and motivated and all these things. And even when you aren't motivated, you still have to do the thing, right? Because that is how a boundary works, and that is how having these expectations are going to help you move your needle forward, be able to stick to your budget, be able to live a joy-filled life instead of struggling in the stress and the overwhelm that comes with finances. Because finances, they are difficult, especially when you bring another person into the play, right? If you two are not talking, if you are not setting expectations or boundaries, whatever word you want to use, then you are not going to be able to communicate and work together. Now, I'm not saying that by setting expectations and boundaries that you are the one setting the rules. No, you have to compromise, you have to work together, and you have to figure out what works best for your families. What is your family values? What are your family values? What are your priorities as a family, not individually? Because when you start thinking individually, then you start fighting even more. Then you start thinking that you are more important than your husband's needs, right? And that is what starts the fighting. That's what gets everything going. And that's not what we want here. We want you to sit down. We want you to work together to create expectations and boundaries around your money that keep you safe and him safe, so that you know your needs are being met and his needs are being met at the same time. And you know how you're going to work through it should something come up at the same time, right? That is what is important. That is how you figure out what those boundaries are that you should have. Okay. The fourth thing that is telling me that you need to have boundaries in place is that you're getting no traction with your financial goals. So if you are sitting there and you have no boundaries in place, this kind of goes along with the constant overspending, right? But it's its own thing in a sense that your financial goals, you created them because they're important to you. But if you are not putting money towards those financial goals and achieving those, even the smallest bit of achievement and celebration, then you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to feel like you're living a joyful life. You're going to feel like you're in that constant paycheck to paycheck lifestyle, like you are struggling, you're going to be overwhelmed. And that's what this is telling me when you're getting no traction with your financial goals, because it's telling me that you are prioritizing whatever you are spending that money that should be going towards your financial goals on more than your financial goals. What are you spending? What is that money going towards? Are your wants right there in the moment overpowering your true financial goals? If that's the case, then you need to sit down and you need to look at yourself in the mirror and you need to say, is this what needs to be happening? Is this what should be continued? What needs to stop and what needs to keep going? That is what you've got to look at. You got to figure out if whatever that money is going towards are your financial goals, your true financial goals, or is it whatever that money is going towards? You got to get serious with yourself sometimes. You got to be diligent. You got to be sometimes scary serious with yourself and really figure out what's going to bring you joy. What can your money do to further your needs and take care of your wants and your wishes and actually move that needle forward? What are your true financial goals? What are your priorities? That's what you got to look at. And if your goals aren't getting traction, maybe you need to change your goals. Maybe it's not an actual goal, or maybe it's the fact that your boundaries are loose and you're just letting that money go wherever it needs to go instead of towards those financial goals, which is a hard conversation with yourself and your husband, because that is not something that you make a decision on by yourself, right? That's something that you work together. Again, communication is key. And if you try to do it by yourself instead of working with him, he's going to feel like it's your budget and that you're the one controlling the money instead of him being involved in it as well. Okay, so then the fifth and final thing that I want to talk about for knowing if you need to set boundaries is that you're taking on more debt than your income can handle. That is a serious boundary that needs to be set. And I know that that is a more specific boundary than what I've been talking about, but it is so big. Like if you are taking on more debt than what your income can actually handle, like maybe your, and this might be over your head, but maybe your savings to debt ratio or your income to debt ratio is perfectly fine. And you actually can take on, according to a bank, more debt, but in all reality, with all the subscriptions that maybe you have, or with all of the bills that you have, you actually can't take on that debt. You actually can't afford another payment. And so the credit card or the payment that you're making on your furniture, or maybe even your phone, like that little bit can throw you over the edge. And then you're not actually making enough money to pay for everything that you have, right? Then you're going back to your needs aren't being met because your bills are then overpowering everything else, which then makes it so that your groceries aren't able to be bought and your gas isn't there. And that's when your quality of life really starts feeling like it's going down. So boundaries around debt is a big deal. I want you to understand that if you are not looking at what your actual budget is allowing for more debt, if that's something you should even choose, I don't suggest it. If I do not have the money, except for a house and cars, those are my two exceptions, I do not buy it. If I do not have the physical cash, I will not buy it. And that has been a saving grace because it's kept me from getting into credit card debt that could so easily become an issue that then I can't get out of, right? So that is a big boundary that you need to get serious about. And you need to make sure that it is not going to affect your overall budget, and that you're still able to save money. You don't want your bills and your needs to encompass your entire income. That is what I call a bare bones budget. And that is where your quality of life just starts to go down, and you start to get depressed and stressed and like really worried about your money and whether you can make it financially, because that is not a place that you want to be. You want to have margin in your budget, whether it's $50, whether it's $500. It doesn't matter how much margin you have in your budget, as long as you are able to still save up for those financial goals. Okay, so let me recap what those 5 signs are. Your needs aren't being met. That's 1. 2, you're constantly overspending. 3, you're fighting about money. 4, you're not getting any traction with your financial goals. And 5, you're taking on more debt than your income can handle. So what do you do about it? What can you do to set boundaries? Well, I've kind of talked about what you can do with some of them, right? The systems that I have in place, those are boundaries. They help you stick to it in a fluid way. But essentially just identify the area that holds the most stress, because you don't want to go and try to set a boundary on every single one of these 5 signs. It will be overwhelming, it will be stressful, and you'll end up just giving up, right? So pick the one that holds the most weight. Pick the one that's going to make the most difference, that you can gain the most traction with and actually make a difference in your budget. And then just create a boundary that helps keep that stress from happening. So boundary, it may be a system, it may be a habit, it may be simply setting limits or setting rules. Those are what you can do to keep you going forward, moving forward, instead of staying stuck and stagnant where you're at, you're going to be able to take a step forward because you're going to be able to say yes or no confidently to whatever it is that you are struggling with. Like if you're taking on more debt than you can handle, you just say, no, I'm not going to put any more debt maybe on my credit card, because even just putting a little bit of debt, even one more thing on your credit card, that ups the amount that you are paying monthly, right? Like common sense, that's what happens. But we don't think about how that's going to affect our budget. We just say, oh, I've got a credit on my card. I sound like I know what I'm talking about, right? Not really, because I don't have a credit card, but you get what I'm saying. There's a limit, and if you have the limit that you can spend, if there's more that you can put on your card availability, then you don't sit down and you don't think about the fact that that's going to up your actual payment, and how much it's going to up it, and whether your budget can handle that amount going up. And so maybe that's simply what you do. You just put a hold on buying anything with your credit card until it goes down to a certain amount. Maybe you say, okay, I have this much that I can put towards my credit card. If that monthly amount goes to that, I can't buy anything else. Even though I have the credit, I could technically do it, but my finances can't cover that. That's one thing you could do there too. If you're fighting about money, maybe you have maybe a weekly or a monthly meeting where you just slowly start talking about money and making it a normal, natural thing so that it's not so stressful and overwhelming, and it doesn't cause as many fights, and it allows you to talk and communicate about whatever's going on, what needs to be added to the budget, what needs to be taken away. Maybe you sit down and you budget together instead of you just doing it yourself, so that you can both see what's going on until you're comfortable with what's going on, and then one person can take it over, right? There are so many things that you can do to ease the stress and to take away the negative things that come with not having boundaries in place. And those boundaries and those systems are going to be the things that really catapult your financial journey into the next month or the next year, whatever it is that you have going on. And I want to say right here that this is what I do. This is what I love doing, is helping you figure out where you are struggling, that one point that holds the most stress, and figuring out a system and a boundary that you can put into place that's going to really move the needle forward in your financial journey, because that is a big thing. You can have the best budget out there, but if you don't have these boundaries in place and you don't have systems that are attached to those boundaries that help you to continue to push forward, then the budget is like null and void. It's pointless. There's no reason to have the budget, because it's just going to be another thing where you look at it, you fill it out for the month, but then at the end of the month, you never actually went back to it and you don't know if you actually followed it, right? That's not what I want for you. I want you to be able to start achieving and reaching your financial goals. I want you to be able to set financial goals. Maybe you're at a point right now where you're like, yeah, I can't even set a financial goal. Let's get you to that point. Let's get you to where your bills are being paid every single month without you having to think about it. Let's get you to where groceries and gas isn't a struggle, and that you aren't constantly overspending on things that you don't really want to buy, or things that are going to affect the things that you do want to buy. That is what I'm here for. That is what I want to help you with. So head on over to calendly.com/Molly Bunnell. That's CALENDLY.com/Molly with a Y, B as in boy, ENELL. And grab yourself a budget coaching session so that we can get your budget under control and start digging into those boundaries that you would like to start achieving, the boundaries that are going to help move that needle forward. So again, you can go to calendly.com/Molly Bunnell and grab yourself a budget coaching session. So with that being said, Mama, I pray that today's episode has opened your eyes to maybe some of the things that you didn't notice were there so that you can take the next step and actually put these boundaries into place so that you can move the needle forward in your financial journey. And with that being said, I will see you right back here next week on another episode of the One Income Family Podcast. Before you go, I hope this episode has ignited a fire inside of you, and I pray that it creates long-lasting impact. Did you know that you too can impact other one-income families? All you have to do is leave a written review, and you help get the podcast in the hands of other mamas in need. You can also text this episode to that friend who is also knee-deep in the same kind of chaos as you and inspire them to make a change. Also, your review lets me know that you're enjoying the show, and that lights me up. I get so excited to hear from you. Another great way that we can connect, though, is through the One Income Family community over on Facebook. So after you're done leaving that 5-star review, head on over to the community where you will find other mamas working their way out of the chaos. You can ask your questions and connect with others who truly understand what you are going through. I cannot wait to connect with you in the community. Until then, I will see you right here next week on another episode of the One Income Family Podcast.